Mercy Ashford stepped down off the coach in her best blue dress to marry a man who had been 3 weeks in the ground, and the only one who came to tell her was the brother who had never wanted her there at all. She had worn the dress for Thomas, the rancher whose letters she had read by lamplight for a year, until she half believed she knew the sound of his voice. She had not imagined a town already dressed in black, or the way the talk on the board sidewalk fell silent when she asked, smiling, where she might find Mr. Thomas Calder. A man stepped out from beside a buckboard wagon, hat already in his hands, and his face told her the answer before his mouth could shape it. They did not know it yet, the two of them, standing stricken in the cold spring street with a dead man's name between them. But that name was going to be the place their two lives finally met. The man was Eli Calder, Thomas's older brother, a stranger to grief the way some men are strangers to soft beds, which is to say, he knew it intimately and trusted it not at all. He told her plainly, because he did not know how to tell a thing any other way, that Thomas had taken a chest fever in the wet end of winter, that it had gone to his lungs in a single hard week, and that they had buried him on the rise behind the home place 9 days back. He said he was sorry she had come so far for nothing, in the flat voice of a man who long ago decided the safest thing to do with feeling was keep it where no one could get at it. Then he stood there, hat in his rough hands, plainly braced for her to weep. She did not weep, not in the street, with the mercantile porch full of watching faces, and Hetty Vane already tilting her head in that practiced, hungry sorrow. Mercy had buried a mother and a father, and a girlhood spent stitching other women's wedding gowns by candlelight, and she had learned that grief shown in public is grief handed to people who have not earned it. So she stood very straight, holding against her front the one thing she had carried all the way west, a small worn tin music box that had been her mother's, and said, in a voice that shook only at the very end, that she was sorry too, and that she would trouble Mr. Calder for nothing but the name of a boarding house. It was a lie, and they both knew it, for she had sold the last of everything she owned to buy that coach ticket. Here is the thing the town did not know, the thing Eli knew and hated knowing. The marriage had not only been a lonely man's hope, it had been a plan to save a place that was sinking. Thomas had mortgaged the ranch to the last rafter through 3 bad years. The bank held paper on nearly all of it, and the one thread he had hung the future on was the steady hands a wife would bring. Now he was gone, the debt was not, and standing in front of Eli was the woman his brother had sent for, with nowhere on this earth to go. He could have let her take her one night, and her one seat back east, and no law could have said a word against it. But Eli had carried his dead brother up that rise on his own shoulder, and lowered him into the ground with his own 2 hands. And somewhere in the doing of it, he had made the kind of promise a man makes to the dead, the only kind that cannot be argued out of. So he did the last thing either of them wanted. He told her, stiff as a fence post and twice as cold, that there was a room that had been his mother's, that she could have it and her keep through the season, and that he would sleep in the bunk room off the barn and ask nothing of her. And Mercy, who had exactly 1 night's worth of choices in her purse, lifted her chin and took a roof from a man who plainly wished she had never gotten off the coach. I have been keeping this hearth a long while now, telling the slow stories, the ones where nobody is saved by luck or by money, but only by the stubborn daily choosing of one another, and if that is the kind of story that keeps you good company in the evenings, then pull your chair up close and stay with me, because Mercy and Eli are about to learn the thing this whole channel keeps circling back to, which is that the walls we build to keep grief out, keep love out by the very same door, and that sometimes it takes an unwanted stranger at your table to make you notice how long that door has been nailed shut. The town had its verdict ready before her dust had settled. By next morning, they knew at the mercantile that Thomas Calder's mail-order bride had come too late for the wedding and was living out at the home place with the brother, unwed, which to a certain kind of mind was a far more interesting arrangement than a marriage would ever have been. Hetty Vane said it gently, which was the unkindest way she had, that it was a pity, a real pity, for a girl to come all that way only to be a burden on a grieving man, and that she gave the poor thing till the next coach before good sense sent her home. Mercy paid for her thread and her lamp oil, and said evenly that she had buried more than this town had guessed, and crossed more country than its talk would ever cover, and walked out with her back straight while the street stored it up for later. The first weeks at the home place were a quiet war. Eli rose before light, worked till after dark, and arranged his whole day so as to cross her path as little as a man could, taking his meals standing at the counter rather than sit across the table from his dead brother's bride. Mercy let him have his silence, and filled the house with the kind of competence that asks for nothing and is impossible to ignore. She mended the torn fence of the chicken run and turned the sour garden. She washed and folded his shirts and mended the torn elbows so fine he had to look twice to find the seam, doing it not to soften him, she told herself, but to earn the roof. And Eli, who noticed everything and said nothing about any of it, ate every bite of the food she set out when he thought she was not looking, and never once said it was good. Mercy noticed his noticing, the second look at the mended seam, the clean plate, and she said nothing either, because they were two people fluent in the same hard language, the one where care is a thing you do with your hands in the dark and never name out loud. If you've made it this far into Mercy's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. What broke the quiet open was not tenderness, it was trouble, the way it so often is. Royce Dunmore rode out one bright morning on a well-fed horse, a heavy-set, prosperous man in a fine dark coat and good leather gloves, with the easy, sorrowful manner of a man who has learned you can take a great deal from people if you look grieved enough while you do it. He held a note of his own on a piece of the Calder grass, bought cheap in one of the bad years, and had been waiting a long patient while for the place to fall. He told Eli kindly, regretfully, that the spring payment was coming due and everyone knew the place could not make it, and that he was prepared, out of neighborly feeling, to take the whole tired burden off his hands and let him walk away clean. Then he looked at Mercy in the doorway with her hands floured and said it was no kind of life for a woman besides, and the decent thing would be to sell and go. Eli did not raise his voice. He told Royce Dunmore the place was not for sale and the payment was his worry and no one else's, and stood very still until the prosperous man tired of smiling and rode back toward town. But Mercy had seen the thing his flat voice was built to hide, which was that Dunmore was right about the money. That night, for the first time, Eli did not eat standing at the counter. He sat down heavily across from her and told her the whole of it, the mortgage and the bad years and the slim, slipping chance, in the voice of a man reading his own sentence. He told her because she already knew the worst of it and would not pity him. And Mercy, who had spent her life turning too little into barely enough, did not pity him. She pulled her chair closer to the lamp and asked how many head he could bring to market by fall, what the grass would carry, what the bank would settle for, and somewhere in the asking they stopped being a man and his burden and became two people with the same problem and a single fire to think it through by. After that the work changed its shape. They did not speak of fondness, and would have denied it had anyone named it, but the war was over, and a grudging partnership had taken the field. He let her keep the books because she had a head for figures his own did not, and she found 2 errors in the bank's accounting in one evening that bought them time. He found he liked the sound of her, which alarmed him. She found the hard set of his jaw was not coldness, but a man holding himself together by main strength, and that it eased a very little when she came into a room, and that alarmed her, too, because she had come west to marry his brother, and the brother was 3 weeks dead, and there is no map for the country they had wandered into. She kept her mother's tin music box on the windowsill where the morning light could find it. It was the one thing in that house wholly hers, a small, dented thing with a hinged lid and a worn brass key, and inside a comb of metal teeth that played, when wound, an old hymn her mother used to hum over the washtub when Mercy was small and the world was a kinder size. She had not wound it since the day the news met her in the street. Some griefs are too near to be set to music, and the box held not one loss now, but two. On the bad evenings she only held it, and felt the cool weight of it, and told herself she had been right to come. The storm came early and hard, the way the worst of them did in that high country. There had been a stretch of thin, lying warmth that fools a body into thinking the bad weather is still a polite distance off, and then the sky went the color of a bruise. The wind swung out of the north, and the rain came down in a cold gray wall, turning to sleet as the dark came on. The cattle were scattered on the low ground where a sudden water could rise and take them, and the whole slim margin of the year, every head they needed to sell to meet the bank, stood out in it. Eli was already pulling on his coat, telling her to keep the fire and stay inside, in the flat voice of a man used to facing the worst alone. Mercy was already knotting her shawl and reaching for the other lantern. They worked that storm together until the small hours, pushing the bawling cattle up off the bottom ground into the shelter of the barn, soaked through and blind with sleet and shouting across the roar of it. She did not slow him down, and more than once when a steer broke, it was Mercy who turned it, riding hard through the dark with her hair come loose and plastered to her face. Eli, watching her, felt something shift in his chest that had been frozen so long he had forgotten it could move at all. They saved the herd, every head. When at last they got the barn shut against the wind and stood in the steam of the crowded animals, spent past speaking, he looked at her, drowned and shaking and fierce, and she looked back, and neither one said the thing that had just happened, because it had no words yet. They went back through the sleet with their shoulders nearly touching. She built the fire up high, and he hung their soaked coats by it, and because there was nowhere on earth to go and the storm was still at the glass, they sat on opposite sides of the hearth with a blanket apiece, and, for the first time, simply talked. She told him about the railroad town and the wedding gowns she had sewn for women who looked straight through her. He told her, in the short flat sentences of a man unused to the sound of his own voice, about the dry years and the father who had broken himself proving the place up. He did not speak of Thomas, but the house spoke of Thomas for him, in the second chair no one used, and a younger man's coat still on its peg, and Mercy, who kept a dead mother's music box on her own window-sill, knew a room arranged around an absence when she saw one, and did not pry. It was the likeness on the mantel that opened him. A few nights on, the weather still keeping them close to the fire, Mercy rose to bank the coals and saw it there, a small framed likeness of a young man with an open, easy face, the face she had built a year of letters around and never seen in life. She stood before it and said simply that he had a kind face and that she was sorry she had come too late to know it. The room went very still. Then Eli began to talk, low and halting, about a younger brother who laughed easily where he could not, who believed the place could be saved when Eli had stopped believing in much of anything, who had written away east for a wife with a hope so plain it embarrassed his hard older brother to watch it. He said very low that he had thought it foolishness and that he had been wrong. Mercy did not try to smooth it away. She only listened the way she had once wished someone had listened to her and told him grief was not a thing you got past, it was a thing you made room for, and that it seemed to her he had built his whole life into one cold room and nailed the rest of the house shut. He looked at her as if she had reached into his chest and named the thing he had carried wordless for years. Then he rose, crossed to the chest beneath the window, and took out a letter, and stood holding it as though it weighed more than paper should. He said Thomas had been writing it the week the fever took him, that it was meant for her, and that he had not been able to read it nor to burn it. He put it into her hands, the last thing Thomas Calder ever set down, addressed in a fading, unsteady hand to Mercy. She read it aloud by the fire in a voice that did not stay steady. Thomas wrote that the cough had got into him deeper than he wanted to say, but that whatever came, he had made his peace with it. He wrote that the ranch was in deeper trouble than a courting man admits, and that he had lain awake ashamed for sending for her under a roof so near to falling. And then he wrote the thing that stopped her breath. If the worst should come, he had written, and I am not there to meet you, do not let them turn you back. Go to my brother Eli. He is a hard man and a cold one, and will not thank me for saying so, but he is the truest soul I have ever known, and there is no one I would sooner trust with a person I loved. He has been alone too long. He has forgotten he is allowed to want anything. You are stronger than this country and kinder than it deserves, and if I cannot give you the home I promised, I would have him give it to you in my place. If the two of you would only stop being so proud long enough to look, you might be the saving of each other. The land was never the thing worth keeping. The people on it always were. Neither of them could speak when she reached the end. The dead man had reached up out of the ground and laid bare the thing they had been circling blind for weeks, too proud and too grieved to name. Thomas had not only foreseen it, he had asked for it, handing his brother and the woman he had hoped to marry to one another as the last and best gift he had left to give. And Eli understood at last what his open-hearted brother had always known, and he himself had spent his life refusing, which is that a man can hold a piece of ground with both fists till the day he dies and still have held nothing at all, if he never once lets another soul stand on it beside him. He looked at Mercy with the letter trembling in her hands, and the wall he had kept up since long before the fever came quietly down, all at once, and he did not try to put it back up. The spring that came after was the hardest and the best either of them had known. There was no sudden rescue, only the long daily work of two people who had finally decided to do it together. They made the bank payment barely, by selling the herd they had saved from the storm, and by Mercy's hard bookkeeping and a season of going without. And they made it the day before it came due. And somewhere in all that shared labor, the grudging partnership quietly became the other thing, the thing the dead man had hoped for, slow and shy. Two people who had each loved and lost, and were not fools enough to think love came without a cost. He learned the tune she hummed under her breath without knowing she did it. She learned his rare, slow smile was worth 10 of an easier man's. Royce Dunmore came back one more time when the spring grass was high, and he brought the town with him for an audience. He had heard, he said sorrowfully, in the dooryard where Mercy had come out into the light, that the unwed pair at the Calder place were carrying on in a manner decent folk could not be expected to overlook, that it was a scandal, and very likely a fraud besides, a town-bred woman with no claim sinking her hooks into a grieving man's land, and that the merciful thing was for her to sell out her interest and go quietly back east. Hetty Vane stood at the edge of the gathered townsfolk, with her head tipped in that practiced sorrow, waiting to see the burden finally sent away. Eli Calder did not raise his voice. He crossed the dooryard and stood beside Mercy, close, in front of the whole staring valley, and took her hand in his rough one, the first time he had ever done it where another soul could see. Then he told them, plainly, that there was no fraud and no scandal, only a woman his brother had loved enough to send for and trusted enough to leave to him, and a debt of the heart he meant to pay in full. Thomas had written it down in his own hand if any of them cared to doubt it, and as for the rest, he would not stand in his own dooryard and hear any man name the woman he intended to marry a schemer. The land was not for sale, the payment was made, and Mr. Dunmore had ridden a long way to be wrong in front of a crowd. Nobody cheered. That is not how it goes in a place like that. The town simply looked and saw a capable woman they had given till the next coach, standing her ground and proven worth far more than their talk, and a hard man they had half buried alongside his brother alive again and unashamed, and they stored it up to think on later. Royce Dunmore found all at once that he had business elsewhere, and turned his good horse and went. Hetty Vane discovered she had nothing prepared to say to a thing so plainly, embarrassingly good. They married in the early summer when the grass was tall and the ranch they had nearly lost stood saved around them. Most of the valley came, a little sheepish now, the way people are when they have been wrong out loud. The widow Constance Lyle brought 3 pies and the only question that ever truly mattered, which was whether they had eaten. Old Hap Dorsey brought his fiddle. Mercy wore a simple cream dress she had sewn herself, and on the table beside the cake sat the small, dented tin music box, and when the eating was done, and the light came low and gold across the valley, Eli asked her quietly what tune was in it. So she wound the worn brass key for the first time since the day the news had met her in the street, and the old hymn her mother used to hum over the wash-tub spilled out small and clear into the warm evening, and she found she could bear it now, because the box no longer held only what she had lost. It held this too. She had been 27, with 1 carpet bag and her mother's music box and a year of letters from a man she would never meet, when she stepped down off that coach into a town dressed in black, certain only that she had lost everything she came for. She grew old on that ranch beside the brother who had been bound by honor to take her in, and stayed in the end for love. The valley that had given her till the next coach came at last to call her by her name, and to bring its mending to her door, the widow Constance Lyle, and old Hap Dorsey among them, and to forget it had ever wanted her gone. On the last evening of this story the light went down gold over the high green country, and an old man and an old woman sat close together on the mended porch of a warm, full house, and on the rail between them lay the little tin music box with its lid open, the old hymn turning slow and sweet in the dusk. Thomas's likeness hung inside on the wall where it had always hung, the brother who was lost, and the love that was found keeping their own steady places under one roof. Love, it turns out, is not the thing that arrives. It is the thing that stays when everything it came for is gone. So here is what I will leave you with tonight, friend, before the lamp burns low, when life takes from you the very thing you crossed the whole world to reach. Do you turn around and carry your grief back home, or do you stay and let the loss make a door of you and find out who was waiting on the other side of it? Tell me which one you would have chosen, and pull your chair up to the hearth again soon.